Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and this week's guest is Alx Uttermann. She is a global self-care and healing speaker, a spiritual inspiration leader, a master healer and trainer. She is a minister as well as a healer and teacher. She's the author of Wafting Toward Heaven. Alx, glad to have you here. It's so great to finally get together. We've been sharing things back and forth on LinkedIn. It's so good to finally meet you face to face, even if it's virtually.
You too. This is really lovely, and I'm really happy to be here and see where this chat goes.
Well, good. We never know. I have great questions sometimes. The first one is generally, let me preface this a little bit because it's necessary to understand that we live half inside and half outside. Most of the time, we're bereft of the conversation about what goes on inside of us. Usually because we think if we start talking about it, people are going to think we're a bit daft or nuts or even crazy. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's an integral part of our collective reality in that bridging of inner and outer realities within ourselves. So that being said, Alx, I set you up with that one, didn't I?
What crazy daft things do you have to say, lady? Well,
Right, exactly. Well, I have enough. I've got 30 plus books on Amazon now with all kinds of crazy weird shit. Um, so with you, in this inner development, this discovery that we have of children, or as children, most of us initially, of our connection to something greater. Right? How did that work for you? Because it's obvious with what you've gone to do in life that there had been an early start that you kind of
oh yeah,
kept.
oh yes,
What
yes.
was that like?
Well, yeah. So a counselor, I was an incredibly precocious infant, which is hardly a shock.
Hmm.
My father would have it that I started speaking at 6 months old, and I didn't say "mama, dada." My first word was butterfly. Largely because my father was standing near my crib and I was watching a butterfly outside the window and he said butterfly and I perfectly said butterfly. And my father, I'm the youngest of six kids, he had been through a number of children and never heard a 6 month old say a real
Right.
word before. So he did
That's
a triple
amazing.
take. Yeah. So obviously I came in with a lot of awareness and capability and certainly no lack of verbal skills.
Right.
But I had mystical experiences since I was a little kid, a lot of them. And there were playfellows who used to come in and around our home who looked like they were about my height, I think, as a small, small child. And they were like bubbly, like iridescent beings. And they were a little mischievous, but they were generally my friends. And I don't think I ever talked about them because I think it was very clear to me that other people didn't see or relate to this kind of level.
Sure. Sure.
We get that message pretty young
Okay.
from the
I have
world
a
around
question
us.
about
So,
the mischievousness, if you don't mind my
yeah, sure.
interrupting you, because that makes me curious, right? Because the mischievous ones, they're like, the Native Americans call them coyotes,
Well, like
right?
that,
Where they're
yeah.
really teachers and
Mhm.
the mischievousness. What was that like? Could
They
you
pranked
describe?
me. They used to prank me. So
Okay.
the one thing that I remember very strongly was that I must have been about, I want to say I was about 3.5, maybe 4 years old. Um, and we had a huge hassock, like a giant hassock, in our area where we watched television as a family. So there were like overstuffed couches and chairs, and then there was this giant, I mean, huge
Hmm.
footrest because a lot of kids, right? So a lot of feet
Right.
rest in theory on this thing, or it could double as a seat or whatever. And I was sitting on one side of it, so the whole other side of it was obscured to me. It was a big round behemoth in the middle of the room. So I'm sitting on one side and I'm cutting paper dolls and papers and outfits and cutting, God knows, whatever. And all of a sudden, I'm looking because I can't find my scissors. And I'm thinking, that's weird. I mean, I'm a small child, so somehow I'm processing that I had put them down and now they're not there. And that seems a little strange. So I'm pawing around, as one does, under papers and, maybe they're, no. And then I was like, oh, they did it again. And I walked around. I clearly remember getting up, walking around the hassock, and there are my little scissors on the other side of the hassock. And I'm like, seriously? Okay. And go back to play. So that's what I mean, mischievous. They were playfellows. They weren't like full on coyote, like, crazy,
Well, they also
just
got you
destroying
to
things or anything.
what, and they also got you to be more cognitive
Oh, heck yeah.
by
Sure.
those things and
I feel like it
recognize.
happened a lot
Yeah.
because my recollection is, oh, again, that was the feeling. I don't have other memories of that kind of playfulness, but it was in the mix, obviously.
Sure.
Yeah, but mostly I wanted to know what was the truth of this creation. I had a pretty strong idea from a really young age that everything we saw and perceived wasn't the total reality.
Right.
I was very strong about that. And I guess I was on a walk with my parents. I must have been about 4 or 5 years old, maybe. And I apparently said to them, if we are just puppets on God's strings, then who is pulling God's strings? And my agnostic parents just lost it. Like, oh my God, who is this child? Like that. So
Right. Right.
that was my inquiry. And honestly, it's been the same inquiry my whole life. You know,
Why not?
why are we here? What is
Right.
behind the God energy? What is the God energy? What is the nature of being a soul on this planet? And how does this whole thing work? That's my nature. Like, I want to know
Mhm.
mechanisms.
Right. Similar experience for me as a teen. I prayed to know what truth was. I was willing to
Mm,
go forward if necessary and did. That's, I was asked and gave my permission. Really weird, right? You talk about weird shit, right?
mm,
And yet it gave um, cohesion
mm.
to that greater experience of not being attached, being curious,
Yeah.
and just wanting to know more
Yep.
with a fearlessness of nothing, with a fearlessness, and including towards death. Because once
Mhm,
you go through that, you realize, oh, well, that's nothing. There really is no death because you're still thinking after you leave,
mhm,
just in a different location. Right?
mhm, mhm.
So, how did those experiences as you were growing up, did you ever speak to others about it, or just you pretty much keep your mouth shut?
No, I don't think I ever talked much about that kind of stuff. I guess obviously I blurted that one out to my parents, but
Hmm.
so I was clearly considering these things a lot. It's interesting. I had also a series of recurring dreams, I think from about 6 to 7 years old, and they were really recurring and quite vivid. And there was a little kid who was a few years older than me in my dream state. So if I was like 6, 7, he was maybe like 10 or 11. And I looked up to him, and he used to come. He was very brown, dark-skinned kid, and he
Hmm.
would come. We would always meet at this one place that sort of was like my house where I was living at the time. And then he would take me down in the basement, and then the basement would turn into like multiple floors of basements of steps going down, 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 like into the center of, the earth. And it felt like a massive complex, like a big apartment or commercial complex of some kind. And he would
Hmm.
always take me down to like where the boilers were and everything that powered the whole building. And he would explain it to me, like how it worked. And this was just a recurring thing. He was like my friend. I mean, he was my friend. He'd show up in my dreams, and then we'd always go down, 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 and down. And he'd show me some other aspect of how the pumps and the valves and I don't even know what the,
Sure.
the
And
mechanisms
the multiple
operate.
layers, he was giving
Mhm.
you, it seems to me, from what I'm hearing from you, is like he's giving you a systems view.
Yeah, different angles.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yes. So that was interesting. And I didn't realize until a few years ago, part of my story is I wound up living in India studying miracle healing with a siddha, with a real saint who had abilities very similar to Jesus and was willing
Hmm.
to teach all that, the mechanisms. And, he's a small, brown skinned Indian man who had incarnated right around the time when I was having those dreams. He was born in this planet right around the age I was when I was having these. So I assume, oh, well, there he was in some subtle form teaching me already the inner depths of how this crazy planet works. So things like that, I had a lot of mystical brushes and teachers and things inside that no, I didn't ever say anything about those things externally.
Sure. And
I didn't
the
talk about
fact
them.
that you recognize what seems to be congruence, right? Because when you, as we understand more the dynamics of creation and how it all fits, it's not so surprising when those serendipitous synchronicities take place and you connect dots because they're there to be connected.
It's
That
yes,
energy.
exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
and as consciousness moves, it's not oftentimes in that fashion local. It's non-local, which means it's evenly distributed,
Oh
right?
yeah.
For us to
Yeah.
kind of tap into and realize, oh, okay, this event's happening, and all of a sudden you remember the several dots that tie
Hmm.
into that, and it creates a logic train that then leaps forward and gives you some kind of new insight.
Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think that's the nature of exploring this creation. We get data points, and each of us has our own different trajectory with that, different dots to connect, different things that make sense to us at different
Sure.
times based on our experiences.
Now,
Yeah.
since you were in India, I'm
Hmm.
sure that the Vedas came into play. That
You could
in
say.
okay, well, it seems to me anyway, that having been through the experience and similar things that you have, that the memo we got through the Vedas, even though they were poems, the essence of it, we're told, is that we're all divine threads connected to source, capable of God consciousness.
That
That doesn't
seems
we
self-evident.
we
Hmm.
yeah, it really does. We're created,
Yes.
even in the Bible, we're told we're created in the image of. Well, what's that mean? It just, we're
Mm.
children when we grow up. What are we?
Hmm.
It seems,
Hmm.
and it seems so ridiculous that the patriarchal system would make woman subservient to man. Well, it's
Especially when
never
Mother
been.
Divine is running the program here.
Right, right. Well, I mean, it just,
Such a comedy.
it is when you can see it as such. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not good things in the process of learning how to understand and live life. However, there's that initial oops that we don't really. Right. It got in there, I think, probably when Constantine put things together and then tried to rule folks with an iron fist. And it's just propagated from there with the fear of things that we're told exist that may not.
Oh, I think since
All reality.
caveman days, men have been intimidated by women's ability to create, and I think there you see the underpinnings of a patriarchal system, a world in which men are physically stronger generally than women. Therefore, it's the dynamic tension between the surface illusion of what is power versus the reality of the inside of what is power,
Like who
and
was
that's always a
Hawkins, power
dynamic tension.
versus force, right?
Mhm. And that's the nature of our planet. This is a place where these things come to, grind out. So it's not a giant surprise, nor is it a surprise that the feminine aspect of human beings, kind of collaborated with that for better or for worse. You know,
All part of our evolutionary path to be seen as such, not necessarily judged,
it is,
which
it
is
is.
which is a real tough thing to do, is just to
Yeah, especially
observe
when you're caught in the
without
crosshairs of
attachment.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a funny thing. So part of my funny childhood story is that my family, which was incredibly agnostic and anti-organized religion, wound up sending me. I'm the last of six kids, so I was the only one who got this. I went to Catholic school, largely because they recognized that I was intellectually a bit ahead of myself in some areas, and so the Catholic sisters were willing to make an experiment and accelerate me as a kid in grade school and high school,
Hmm.
whereas our local public school wouldn't hear of it. So that's how I ended up going to Catholic school, where I discovered a lot of different mystical things at play. The Catholic Mass itself is actually really something. And as an outsider, because I had no dog in the race,
Right.
it wasn't my stuff. I didn't do the First Communion and all the sacraments and all the stuff. I was an observer, really. But I was going to Mass 3 days a week for 8 years, I guess, and experiencing it inside and feeling the energy, feeling the presence of Christ in a really extraordinary way, and having a lot of engagement with Christ in a way that sometimes I would get kind of hysterical because I was like yelling at him on the cross. There was a big cross in the
Right.
crucifix in the church. It was an old French era 1800s church.
Wow.
Crying and screaming at him. Like, why did you do that? Expecting a response and not getting it immediately. And I was really livid. But also, I discovered the lives of the saints. Outside my fourth grade classroom, there was a whole little bookshelf in the hallway, which was largely unnoticed, I think, by the other students, but it had little like child age biographies of all the Catholic saints. And I was so intrigued by these people. I'm like, who are they?
Mm.
And, half of them at least were women. And I was like, oh, I like these people. I feel a kinship with these people. I devoured those biographies. I read some of them numerous times and walked away with the feeling that here were both men and women who had some kind of holiness or some kind of mystical capacity. I don't know what I thought I was probably 8 years old in the fourth grade, but something hit me really hard about these people. They felt like friends to me. And it's not unnoticed that, in that respect, Catholicism has a kind of pantheon that includes a lot of women.
Yes.
Unlike a lot of strains of Christianity who maybe do a little homage to Jesus's mother, maybe, and kind of leave it there.
True.
But the Catholics have tons of very high, amazing, miraculous female people. So, and they tied in very nicely with my obsession with Greek and Roman myth that went back to like when I was 4 years old and started reading mythology, because I was obsessed with goddesses, of course. Who wouldn't be?
Oh, yeah.
So here were as it were, the goddesses of the Catholic Church, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. This all sort of seems woven together somehow.
Now, how do you see, on that same strain, how do you see that divine feminine energy today in how it's being brought forth, explored, incorporated, and put into the lives of men, for instance?
I think it's very confusing for a lot of men. I think, our whole worldwide population, majority, I'm not going to say all because one shouldn't make ridiculous generalizations, but majority of this planet has done patriarchy for a really long time. And more or less with not so much accountability about that. And it's women who have borne the brunt of a lot of suffering, historically and in the present day. And so when we see stuff start to get upended in that dynamic, we could say, in American culture since the 60s, when women started entering the workplace and having the birth control pill and suddenly deciding whether or not they wanted to get pregnant if they had sex, taking a kind of commanding over their own procreational life, starting to have independent, bank accounts and credit cards, which happened in the 1970s mostly. We start to see this kind of upswing of the feminine taking a really radically different role from what had been, preceding it. So on a societal level, we see a lot of shift there. But I think the underpinning was, generally speaking, the men were kind of in charge or something to be pushed against. A lot of conversation about glass ceiling or women in corporate being accused of being, pushy bitches instead of assertive leaders. This kind of thing.
Just like the guys were.
Yeah, but they're not called pushy bitches. Right? They're assertive, but women are somehow, so there was still this fragrance of the guys are in charge and you upstart ladies coming to try to push on that. I feel like from a divine point of view, you look at India, where a majority of the deities are in the Hindu tradition, the Vedic culture, are female. And to be respected, even though that doesn't necessarily play out on a societal level. Okay. But there's
foundation is there. It just may not be,
something primordial is there and has been for, since time immemorial. What I experienced in India was directly the Divine Mother. My master was kind of an expert on her in a way that I think few are. uh, this guy here at Kalashwar, he working in tandem with a lot of great souls, a lot of great rishis and really supernatural beings, both in the body and out of the body. He was kind of given the task to bring the understanding of Divine Mother back to humanity in a proper way, not in a distorted or misunderstood way.
Mhm.
And that was one of his major missions as a saint on this planet. So he was training us from early on I met him in 99, um, which was interesting, but he began in the early 2000s really schooling us about the nature of the mother. All sides, not
Mhm.
only beautiful, loving mother side, but what is this creation? How is this creation playing out all of her in her total spectrum of positivity and negativity,
Well,
both?
we have the ultimate mother that we are standing upon,
Yeah, well, that's one.
and which is, when we consider it, indigenous folks, they talk about Mother
Mm-hmm,
Earth, Father Sky. Well, Mother Earth is where we all
mm-hmm,
come from. Every
hmm.
cell in our body is made of material that's come from Mother Earth.
Yeah,
Now, the
true that.
consciousness that we have, the Father Sky aspect of it, is that condensation into form of that formlessness of which we are at the source level,
Hmm.
that comes in, such as the Vedantic philosophy states, as a divine thread that has access to the infinite intelligence specific to that divine thread, not
Hmm.
necessarily for another one, right? Because we don't need to know who others are or what they're doing. We only need to know what our specific vibration is and how to find resonance and flow in life with that and through that. Now, understanding that, and I know you do, how did you find as you move through life in your teens and early 20s and beginning to find um, your way as an adult? How did that make a difference? And were you able to see things in others as well as and have those kind of running commentaries in your head as you were going through life and still not necessarily, knowing how to talk about it, let alone having the words.
Well, I came through, I was deeply skeptical about all of it. And looking back at my younger self, I would say I was deeply heartbroken by trauma and life and circumstances that just seemed to keep, I mean, I really, there were some tsunami waves in my childhood and teens. And so teens and 20s were remarkably confused, I think, and deeply, traumatized,
Mm,
and trying with some fiber of backbone internally to come out of it.
mhm.
And I think there was always a pervasive understanding in me, unshakable, that this is not all there is on this planet. That even all these awful things happening sequentially over and over again were not the be all and end all of that which is me.
Right.
So I was
So speaking of
pretty
you,
stubbornly determined to figure all that out
yeah,
without having any idea that that's what I was trying to figure out, if that makes sense.
it does. It makes absolute sense, which begs the question, when did you figure out it was all you?
I think I had glimpses and bits of it. I can remember I was about 26 or 7, maybe. Is that
Hmm.
right? Somewhere in there. And I was walking in a forest in Northern California, just strolling down the road from my house to a bus. And I was feeling kind of stressed about a whole lot of things. And as I'm walking and I'm sort of reviewing the stresses that I'm experiencing right now, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, like straight out of nature, you know, the mother. Oh, well, truthfully, the only thing that's really stressful in my entire life right now is me. Oh, wait a second. So there's a me that is way beyond all this kind of stuff. So I didn't come at it philosophically. I didn't know that that's sort of the gist of a lot of spiritual tomes and teachers and all that. I hadn't no brush with any of that yet. A lot of it just came spontaneously from inside. Oh,
And questions and logic.
so I'm generating a lot of stuff that is maybe necessary or unnecessary in my experience at any given moment. Oh, mm,
Mm,
mm, mm. I'll also say this, that my younger years, because there was so much trauma and massive abuse, that one of the biggest early lessons of teens and 20s that I really got to learn was forgiveness
mm.
and the absolute necessity of it and the incredible power in it. And again, nobody told me this. It just, I had to figure it out inside.
Right.
I think largely because I started to notice that if I held any kind of really corrosive feelings toward people who had done me wrong, I wasn't serving anybody.
Least of all,
File that under stress causing
right.
to myself.
And why would you carry that stuff? You don't feel good, you're not happy,
No,
but
not at
yet
all.
there's this of those 70,000 thoughts a day, right? There's this obsession on being self-critical and others critical to the point where you lose sight of you until you finally shows up and said, hello, you're
Yes,
stressful here.
there was always an inner strength that would defy conventional emotions and
Mhm.
conventional reactions to things. Let me say it like that. I always had a pretty clear, looking back at it, of course, at the time, as I say, I was just a confusion mess. But
Sure.
looking back at it, there was a through line of, no, actually, no. No, you don't get to entertain, bitter years long resentment about the way you were treated as a child. No, you don't get to do that. No, better let it go and move on and go to the next thing and go to the
Sure.
next thing. And I say it now, it sounds like an easy sentence. Of course, at the time it was hard won
Oh,
and
absolutely. Yeah.
tooth and claw, it was
Yeah,
painful.
yeah. Well, and you're, clawing, crawling, trying to walk and let alone run, right? It's just like
Mhm.
running just feels impossible, except away from at some point, right?
Yes,
You just
also.
want to run from it instead of
Absolutely.
toward it.
Yep.
And yet, kind of like Dr. Laszlo said, your higher self is operational. It's feeding you the
Yep.
thoughts when you ask the questions or you become concerned. It's right there.
Yep.
You have to, in my experience, be curious enough to ask the questions
Mhm.
first, because it's like you're like, well, we are like teenagers growing up, right? We got all the answers, don't want to hear any questions.
Oh dear. Yes. Well, that way leads to a lot of unnecessary suffering. But yes, of course, that's
It
natural.
it does.
That's the human
Exactly.
condition.
And
I'm good. I don't need any help. Oh, really? Golly, because you're about to drive your car right into that brick wall. Oh, you want to drive into a brick wall again. Okay, good. Go ahead. Try it again. See how that works. Yes. Yeah. So, it all kind of came organically. And again, I was so bruised, that the concept of God or spirituality or energy or all that stuff kind of just did not appeal to me. Um, I think all of that came through, direct communion, I would say, with nature. And then I'm a really fortunate human being. I have no explanation for it except that at every turn in my whole life, even when there were really traumatic things, there were also sort of angelic people were put there, I would say, to balance everything. And they inevitably came with messages that were precisely the thing I needed to hear at a given time in order to then ask the next layer of questions and to get to the next layer of something inside. So, in that sense, I could say, I had mentorship my whole life. Uh, would any of those people have thought that that was the role they were playing for me? Probably not. But nonetheless, that's how I experienced and interpreted things that were said to me that would like spur the next inquiry inside. So in that sense, I was really fortunate. And that all kind of started coming, I think, to a head probably mid 20s and certainly mid to late 20s. And somewhere in my mid to late 20s, a then partner, boyfriend, handed me, he was deeply, um, I would say he was a spiritual character. He
mhm,
had been engaged in a lot of different, mystical things and meditation processes and this and that for most of his life. And He handed me one day a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi from Yogananda, and he said, I think you might actually really enjoy this because of the tenor of the conversations that we were having.
Hmm.
And that was kind of a, that was a game changer.
It
uh,
is.
yeah, it really
Great
upset
book
me.
too.
It is a great book. Oh my God, a classic. But it really upset me, to be honest. I remember reading the first few pages. And, he's describing all kinds of miraculous things, including his master's master, who was in multiple bodies at once and showing up in different people. And they all see this person, except he couldn't be because at the same time he was in a different location, seen by other people. And I'm slamming the book shut, going, oh, this is bullshit. This is ridiculous. That can't happen. Right. I mean, it was really funny. And then I'm like, this guy's got to be lying. And then I'm looking at that beautiful, heart melting visage of Yogananda on the cover of the book with those eyes. And I'm like, oh, God, all right, you're not a liar.
Mm-mm.
Maybe you think that's what happened. I don't know. And then I'd go in and read a few more pages, and get more upset by some other supernatural, miraculous thing. And then again, slam the book shut and again, look at that face and just be like, oh, damn it. Okay. So it was a big initiation to
Hmm.
my soul to wake up to that dimension of possibility. And I did not go without kicking and screaming, I have to say. That
Good.
has characterized, I think, most of my early spiritual life. Everything real that came to me, super big resistance from that heartbroken, bruised side of me that just did not want to entertain any of that.
Sure.
But was going to entertain that. I often joke, like if someone had told me at a young age that I would end up where I am now, I would have laughed them out of the room.
Oh, probably
Absurd.
so. I think we all would because we don't, it's hard for us to fathom what's possible when we're unaware. And then as
Mm.
you become more aware that, what you were talking about, the multiple bodies showing up or it's more than bilocation. I think
Yeah,
it's multi-location
yeah,
show.
why not?
There was a guy that here in the valley, I'm in the Chandler, Arizona, live in the Phoenix Valley area. Years ago, in 1920s, there was a guy named Bayard Spalding. Name may be familiar to some. He got a group of scientists together. He'd read about these guys that would live to be hundreds of years old in Southeast Asia. And he's like, that's bullshit. I'm gonna, So he gathers a group of scientists. This was the 1920s. And they go over there and they have some of the same experiences you're talking about.
Mhm.
Um, just amazing stuff. And so Baird ends up writing, I think it's either six or maybe it's just five books called The Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East,
Oh yeah,
that he
yeah,
talks about these experiences, and they are mind-blowing.
yes, they have to be. The mind has to be blown. I think that's a big common denominator, right? It has to be. We have to experience something that the mind absolutely cannot
Right.
process.
Well, and that's the good word
Must.
right there. How can we possibly understand possibilities when the thoughts of them serve as that can't be
No,
right.
not
And
with the mind. The mind is a total mischievous saboteur when it comes to all
And
that.
if you think that way, then it probably won't because you're not ready for it. You're not willing to have that open-hearted, minded
Yeah. Yep.
inquiry.
Yep. What I've come to see is that the soul itself is waiting for the real things. And the
Hmm.
real things are so beyond the capacity of the mind to even consider them. And the mind has its own little role, right? Which is as an extension of the egoic structure. The mind is like, I'm in charge here. Anything I think is true. Oh yeah, great. Whatever I believe, right? Belief systems are, as we know, rather powerful.
Yeah, the
That's
lesson
it.
in the egoic mind, you're right. And
That's
then,
the final arbiter of everything. And then you get hit with these experiences that are like the mind cannot process people showing up in two places at the same time. The mind is like, no, that can't be, as is reasonable.
now that's
Yet
an
it
outer
can be.
experience. What about the visceral experience that we have? It's become obvious, and it seems anyway, that we really can't think our way through a
Okay.
system built on vibration. We've
And
got to sense our way through it. Well, how do we
yes,
do that? Our
the mind
body's a
has no
transceiver.
role there. Yes. Yeah.
It
And this,
has it has a role in the distillation of those sensations in order to deliver the reality of what they truly mean on a frequency level, not on an interpreted belief system level. Because in those realms, there really is no belief system. It's an experience system
yes,
that then
that's
unfolds as you inquire further. Now,
that's the
as
deal.
you inquired further, what did you find?
Hmm. You know, again, I couldn't even say at the time that it was a conscious inquiry.
Hmm.
Really, could not. It seemed flailing my way toward something real. Um, I learned a lot actually um, through music and through composing poetry. I was a writer since I was a little kid, I think as a creative outlet for all the complex emotions and situations and things
Sure.
that I was going through. And somewhere in my 20s, when I became a real poet, not just somebody scribbling stuff, um, I noticed that when something was confusing to me, didn't have an answer for something, maybe a complicated emotional situation or a relationship or something deeper perhaps, I would write a poem with that feeling and just sort of explore whatever would come out. And I
What a
would read it.
process.
Yeah. And I would read it later and be like, well, that's how I feel about that. Oh, or that in the reflection from an external voice, as it were. I mean, it's still
Mhm.
me, but from this
Right.
reflected
Right, but
quality,
again, you're once removed at least.
then I would see, oh, well, look at that. It would come out through the cracks of reason. It would come out in words, but it's almost what's unsaid or between the words that would suddenly be the giant aha. So I began to use poetry in particular as a vehicle to figure out how I understood the world.
Right. It's like the
And I
space
would,
between the notes.
yeah, exactly. And kind of like excavating, what am I in this world and how do I feel about that? From myriad angles, but essentially
Mhm.
that was, I think, the big question. So the inquiry, it wasn't conscious. I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to inquire now about these things. It was just sort of like, you know, this is a mystery to me. I'm gonna write about it. And inevitably something extraordinary would emerge. I'd be like, oh, now I see how I understand that. Left to myself, I couldn't have articulated it just in converse or internally thinking about it. It just seemed like an amorphous confusion. But the moment it came out on the page, for some reason, that reflected quality of it was enough to be a kind of guidepost. So
Sure.
that happened. I did have a formal spiritual mentor in Jack Schwartz, the great mind over matter guy from the 60s and 70s.
Hmm.
I was fortunate to meet him in the 1990s and studied with him a bit, and he was a rare character, I have to say. Um,
No doubt.
he imparted quite a lot to me. Um,
Speaking of rare characters, before I'd like to come back to that because I think it's a great thought you're going to reveal.
mm,
In your ability to write the poems,
mm,
reflect on yourself, have your
mhm,
own voice and your observation of that, you're creating a conversation with self, right?
mhm, mhm.
Do you
Deep.
find that now as you're more mature, let's say,
Mhm.
that you're able to convert that into conversation and that things flow when you have that reciprocal energy with another, that you go deep and wide
Yeah,
and cover some
yeah,
amazing things sometimes.
yeah. I don't need the tool of writing anymore so much, and haven't for a couple decades now. But majority now, it comes out through the teaching that I do. I train. So I trained in miracle healing, and
Mhm.
which is not a small. That's a tall order. The mechanics of the miracles. How do they happen? At
What's
the
the
most,
science behind them,
yes,
right?
yeah, yes. And not only that, but in experiential science, which
Mhm.
is the rishis, when they wrote palm leaf books that are not the Vedas that we know conventionally as the four Vedas, although loosely one would say related to Atharva Veda, which is the one that has to do with all the supernatural stuff.
Hmm.
But my master had these ancient manuscripts, 5,000, 7,000 years old, on leaves of dried palm leaves that the rishis had written formulas. They wrote the mechanics of the creation, how healing happens in mantra and in yantra diagram,
Hmm.
and they explained how to, let's say, for example, turn one thing to another, like, oh, I don't know, water to wine. So they explained it. They said A, B, C, D. You do this mantra for X amount of days, you gain this capability, you apply it thus, and these things happen. To break it into a very simple form. So I teach all of the material that I learned from India, and it was exacting. I mean, it was like medical school, but for a supernatural person.
Hmm.
And it was many years, and it was incredibly rigorous, and it cost the everything, the
Right. Well,
egoism
you got to
and
be
the
willing to give your life. Seek the
yes,
truth at all costs, including your life.
yeah, well, yeah, but I mean the process of grinding down the false self and
Mhm.
all of its
I
ridiculous
call it
structures.
excruciatingly fun.
Yeah, exactly. It's an acquired taste.
Yeah, exactly.
But to come to this place where it's like a PhD, let's say, in spirituality, and that's what I teach mostly. And
Cool.
majority of the last few years, especially, I'm more focused on the teaching because I want to train people as best as I'm able to do what I can do and to understand the things that I now understand.
Sure.
So in the course of that, that's where the reality things suddenly pop out of my mouth. And I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, and I will hear some extraordinary statement get made from this vehicle. And I'm thinking,
Where the hell did that come from? Right?
that's so interesting
Yeah.
because in the way that I used to write and have the amorphous curiosity about something, but no settled conclusion about it, it will come out in the course of teaching. And suddenly I'm realizing I was wondering without wondering exactly about that point, and here it is expressed.
Hmm.
Huh. And it's right. I can feel it. I know it's true.
Now,
Like,
is that something back to Swartz? Because or Schwartz,
oh, Jack Schwartz?
yeah, because you were beginning to go in there when I diverted you back into the other. You were talking about how or what you really learned from him, and one
From
of the things
Jack,
you
he
developed.
was an expert in the human energy system. That was his sort of stock and trade. He was a mind over matter guy. He
Hmm.
was famous for like putting a sail needle through his arm in front of and I mean through his arm, through muscle and vein and whatever, in front of a live audience, asking them, do you want it to bleed? Do you not want it to bleed? Whatever it was he would do. He's got this thing sticking out of his arm that he threw for like a half an hour, and it's all rusty and germy and everything. And then after a while, you pull it out, and then it would heal within, I don't know, 5 minutes, a half hour, totally no mark that this thing had been in him.
Hmm.
So he was an expert in the chakras, the breath, and how the human energy system does what it does. And that I learned from him. And it was a good springboard for India, which then took me into whole way deeper realms. I mean, way, way, way deeper. And involved also Jesus in India. I had the great privilege of living and studying in a place where Christ did live and meditate and left some objects
Mm.
and wrote himself a manuscript actually on palm leaves that my master had and was teaching us directly from that. So that was just a whole other, Jack Schwartz was like a scratch the surface and hey, these things are possible. And then by the time I got to India, wow, fully
You were
mind
immersed.
blown. Hmm?
You were immersed.
I was, yeah. I lived there for 5 straight years on the ashram of Sri Kaleshwar and trained very experientially in the nature
Hmm.
of the miracles, in the nature of Mother, who she is, how she operates in this planet, how her illusion structure works, how her divine heart works. And again, experientially. So, literally, at certain points, being put in the room with a form of Divine Mother who had just come there,
Mm.
not a human being.
I can sense put myself in that place because I've been in that kind of energy. How would you express that to
Hmm.
in imparting some experiential knowledge, maybe even a little wisdom to a lay person or to a secular person? It's like,
Depends who they are and what their interest is.
um,
It really is a case by
agreed. You got to have
case.
the curiosity. However,
Yeah.
because this is one of the things that I'm tempted to do with the show. It's like, okay, we take these huge things and these weird, stuff that we don't always know what to do with, and yet collectively we're figuring it out by exploring and sharing and the tasty tidbits, especially of transcendence, if you will, from the previous self to the new self.
Yeah.
How how do you see that
Well, that's
in
a really good question.
I told you I'd ask you some, right?
This is a really good question. So, I I have a number of answers for this beautiful question. The
Wonderful.
first, the first is that I meet people wherever they are, and my life experience has been wide enough, and my spiritual experience has been wide enough, and also my very skeptical nature as a young person and a deep agnostic comes in really handy when
Mhm.
speaking to people who are at that level. So I feel like I can pretty well meet anybody where they are and start to mess with their belief system a little bit or start to invite them to look a little bit deeper.
Right.
That's answer A. Mm.
Okay.
Answer B is the energy that I carry, which is the consciousness energy of, let's say, Mother Divine, Father Divine, the mystical river of consciousness that's flowing from ancient India through the present time. It makes its own way. And honestly, sometimes I don't even need to say that much because the energy starts to communicate itself.
Hmm.
And what I see is that it will land with a soul and kind of like hook that soul a little bit like a fish beyond their mind's awareness of that. Someone is left with a wow, that lady said some things. I don't even know what she said, but I felt something and I want to find out more. So that's really interesting to me. It's a soul mechanism. It's not a conversation. It's not the substance of what was said. There's something about the energy itself.
Sure. It's
I had
non-linear and non-local.
totally, and yet very local. It's like the person. So
The experiential side of it is impeccably local.
inside,
Yeah.
yes. And some people it hits, some people it doesn't hit. Who knows? This is the way, you know. I about a year ago I did an interview with a rather popular podcaster on YouTube, and what was fascinating. So I was telling some of these things, and the energy was flowing pretty. It was a river,
Okay.
and it was fascinating that a lot of people had a response to it, and the response was, I've been interested in this kind of thing my whole life, but whatever it was that you said, I want to know more. That was the gist of it.
Hmm.
Sometimes it was a particular thing or a story I told or an angle about something that hit somebody. Oh my God, I want that. Or it was the possibility that healing was there. You know, everybody wanted to come and get healing sessions with me. Okay. But it's over all these decades, it's not generally people who consider themselves to be spiritual. It's usually kind of lay people who are suddenly like, what is that? Oh my God, I need that. And that's interesting to me. Like, you can't predict. It's a soul thing. It hits their soul goes,
Exactly. Well,
that.
then now you have just what I'm getting from that is you've just made the distinction between the experience system and the belief system. If you have a
Mm.
belief system, you're not concerned about the experience because you're told what kind to have,
Yeah.
and
And it's
instead of given
reinforced
it
by whatever
permission to
your
find your
community
own.
or teachings are. Mhm. Yeah. But these things defy that. And there's this inner, there's like a thrill. There's like, whoa,
There's
wait,
an
what was
inner heretic, right?
that? Well, to the belief systems, yes.
Right.
Must be. Look at every mystic from every tradition. They defy the tradition not defy necessarily, but transcend the tradition from which they emerge. Whether
Right.
we're talking about Rumi and Hafiz coming way up out of Islam, if we're talking about Jesus, who was certainly not just a nice Jewish guy from Palestine. I mean, he was a mystic, right? Or we're
Right.
talking about the Buddha, who was a beautiful, Indian prince who suddenly came up out of, and all the subsequent, saints in these different lineages. Francis of Assisi, I mean, would we really call him a Catholic at this point? No, he was
Mhm.
way beyond that. They're all
You got Lao
in
Tzu
the
and Wang
consciousness.
Tzu and
Yeah, oh,
all
the
the Tzus,
Taoists,
you know.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Lao Tzu, yes.
Maybe a
Chuang
few
Tzu.
boys named Sue. Um,
Yeah. But they are, everybody, when they hit a certain level, whether they came from a foundational belief system or not, they definitely go way beyond that, much to the chagrin of everybody around them. It was like, wait, no, you're supposed to follow these rules. They're like, well, actually, no,
aren't
there's a
they?
higher set of rules.
And in the acquiescing to them, aren't, as we understand the reality, we're children to begin with. We learn precepts, we have layers of understanding, we have layers of experience that we can have, should we so choose. And then sometimes we haven't even we have them even we don't necessarily make the choice to have them,
Correct.
simply to wake us up because there's that inner part of us that is operational. It's trying to come to the surface and get us
That's
paying
it.
attention to it.
It wants to know, okay, aside of all this, whatever the this is,
Mhm.
what am I really? And religions, spiritual paths, different belief systems give maybe a small piece of that. Certainly not anything near the totality of what that is, because as you're saying, it has to be experienced.
Right.
You can't you can't think your way into it. You can't read your way into it. A lot of people, they come to me because my master gave extensive lectures, which have all been transcribed, and there are thousands and thousands of pages of unbelievable, like encyclopedic knowledge of how this creation operates from him.
Mhm.
And they'll say, "Oh, but I read this, I read this, I read this, I read this." I'm like, "That's great, but it's like sitting on the side of a swimming pool reading a book about swimming. You can't learn swimming unless you get in the water.
Right.
Theory doesn't cut it. I mean, it does for some people. It satisfies something in them. Philosophy,
Well,
okay, but
now let
we
me
need
offer this.
direct experience."
Absolutely. It's the direct experience that trumps it all. However, once you've had the direct experience, like we were talking about, where's the science behind that?
Good
And
to have
where's
the knowledge to back it up and to make sense of it, because if you simply have direct experience, it's so overwhelming potentially. You don't know what the hell just happened.
you don't know where to fit it in,
Yes.
right?
Good to have some knowledge then to kind of hang your hat on and say, oh, that's what that was.
Right.
Oh, very helpful, which is why I teach a lot of spiritual knowledge in concert with giving high energy practices that lead pretty quickly to direct experience of something that is just mind blowing. We need a little bit of the knowledge, yes, but majority, my experience is people need direct experience of these things that like let's say once you crawl into the swimming pool and try to paddle around and keep your head above water and not drown, something then about the nature of the water and about this process of swimming that you wouldn't know any other way,
Right.
and that's
Wouldn't know
invaluable.
your natural buoyancy
Oh,
either.
for instance, correct. Good point. Right. Mark Twain said, the guy who holds a cat by the tail learns something he couldn't learn any other way. And there's a lot of truth to that.
Hmm.
We need direct experience of the God nature. We need direct experience of what we would call supernatural. Because once you have that inside, then you really know something. Theory then may or may not support that, but something,
Right.
and it's absolutely unshakable because it happened to you, right?
Sure. Now let me ask you, let's fast forward and go back just a few years.
Sure.
Pandemic.
Oh,
The sequestration and obsession on self-hygiene gave us all an opportunity to stop, look, and listen to self and self-examine. What do we believe in? Who am I? Where do I want to go? And because everybody stopped, right? It's like the ultimate
pause button.
gift, and yeah, the ultimate pause button
Mhm.
and the gift for self-reflection and creating a new normal that is expansive and has the opportunity to be even more so as we progress. Now, that's something that I presented to my wife, that as soon as we went on lockdown, I saw the opportunity there, and I was like, okay, now what's going to happen
Mhm.
to validate that if it's true?
Mhm.
And then shortly thereafter, these virtual groups started popping up with people
Mhm.
looking for each other,
Yeah, of
right?
course.
Now, how do you see? Now, that's the initial part. We're still in this
Mhm.
chaos to order phase where we're feeling more chaos than we are order because it's uncomfortable in that change process of blooming, right? We're humans blooming
Well,
now.
this is a creation of polar opposites, right? Light and dark, good and evil, male, female, night and day, etc. It is always a planet of upheaval, disturbance, confusion. That's a given.
Hmm.
I think part one. But
Okay.
so,
I'm up.
within that, there is a kind of divine order that's sitting right in the backdrop of everything. However, how much that really gets expressed on the surface level?
Right.
Well, jury's out. Last 5,000 years of our history haven't really been so much in that direction,
No,
but
not at all.
whatever.
And yet there are
But
folks. Another one's a guy named Dudley Lynch wrote a book called The Mother of All Minds, and he's basically saying that um, previously we had an alpha mind and alpha chassis steeped in competition.
yeah,
The beta mind, still in the alpha chassis, which is the body, right, now has an understanding of oneness. Doesn't necessarily know how to
yeah, yeah. How do
distill
we
the
get there?
elements
There's the
of it.
big disconnect, and there's the big adventure for the human souls. Let's say,
Correct.
but back to the pandemic question. So,
Yeah.
mm, my understanding of the God quality is I love this abbreviation of generator, operator, destroyer, the GOD, in
Hmm.
cycle, always cycling, always cycling. You can see it in your own thoughts. Like a thought will generate, you might operate on it for a little bit, it'll diminish, and the next thought will come of your 17,000, impulsive whatevers. There are waves, right? And there's cycles. And everything in this nature, in this creation, goes through cycles of generating, operating, destroying. Some cycles are very brief, like the life of a butterfly.
Mm-hmm.
Other cycles are longer, let's say a parrot, or a human life, or an empire. Everything generates, starts, right? Idea,
Rhythm,
let's create
cycles,
this.
patterns,
Operating for a
processing.
while, then again destroying, then again generating again in a beautiful way. So I
Right.
do acknowledge that, millions of people worldwide died in this damn pandemic. I mean, there was a lot of destroying cycle going on, out of which is coming this generative quality of, okay, wow, first off, Jesus, we lived through that. Whew. Secondly,
That was an
um,
interesting exclamation point on that one.
hmm, you know, some people didn't. And so I think a lot of people had to grapple with the trauma of losing loved ones
Mhm.
unexpectedly to this thing that in the beginning nobody even knew exactly what it was, and it was shocking.
Right.
Um,
But it's interesting, the numbers, when they flushed out, weren't
mm,
that much different. There was a lot of false narratives being created in order to continue
mm.
some agenda, obviously. And
Personally, because I have a very wide sphere of people, I like over 100 people that I knew took off from COVID in the US. And in
Mhm.
India, the numbers were just, oh my God. Anyway,
I'm
so
not saying that those people
intense.
didn't do that.
So
I was looking
we
at the
lived,
overall numbers
yeah.
that,
So we lived through that, and those who survived it, I'm just saying, like in the generating, operating, destroying, there was a lot of destroying,
Mhm.
which meant that a lot of people had to grapple with life and death issues that maybe they wouldn't have of loved ones quite so soon. Also, what I observed was a lot of people, let's say in the U.S., who were suddenly at home for the first time, like it or not like it. And I noticed a lot of people had a lot of mental health issues around being all of their escapism, their outlets
Mental
for
health and domestic
ignoring the
violence.
self, but the outlets for ignoring the self were taken away.
Mhm.
And I mean, to people like me, this is heaven on earth. I'm like, woohoo! I'm just at home with my honey bunny and our cats. We get the food brought
That's the way
in.
we were. We didn't get anything brought in, but life didn't change for
Excellent.
us. Our businesses
Excellent.
grew. We operated like nothing was happening. We got
Fantastic.
kind of weird eyes in, in stores when we were,
Mm,
but we rarely got refused
mm,
service with the exception of Sprouts. And Sprouts said, no, you don't have a mask. You're not coming in. We're like, okay, we'll
mm,
go someplace else.
mm.
And
No, I
did.
stayed home. I stayed home for years, and it was great. I mean, I have no problem with that. I come from a lineage of saints who live in caves and really don't see other people.
Right.
I'm like, great, so we're in the cave. I mean, that was my feeling, but I know for a
Especially if you got
lot of
somebody to share it with.
yeah, of course. But even were it just me, this is fantastic. I mean, had it not been for all the people dying, this would have been great. So what I observed was it was a kind of line in the sand drawn for people about how comfortable can they be with themselves.
Hmm.
And if people were not comfortable with themselves, there were, meltdowns and mental health issues, and parents who had jobs outside the house were now at home with small children and no child care and still doing their work, but digitally, and having to grapple. So people had to wrestle with a lot of, I think, kind of home truths in a way that under normal circumstances they could buy off or
Hmm. But,
ignore or
one
get
of the
involved in
facts
other things.
business-wise with the remote working, the
Mm.
statistics actually went up for productivity
Of
when that
course,
happened.
despite the corporate narrative that, oh, if
Right.
we let everybody work from home, they'll slack. No, actually, they won't. And especially given how suddenly isolated and narrowed everybody's lives were, your work, I think for a lot of people, especially in corporate, was a relief
Uh,
because
Less distractions.
it gave you something to do, to
Yeah.
focus your mind not on like, oh God, am I going to get this thing and have health so there was that. And but also I want to say that I have a lot of friends who are clergy of various denominations, uh, ministers, rabbis, etc.
Hmm.
One friend is a rabbi. She was at that time in rural Louisiana. God knows why, but anyway, there she was. And she said, the majority of my work was sitting on Zoom, listening to the mental health issues of my congregation. So many clergy members burned out completely because that was not limited to this one lady and her congregation. So many people were suffering so greatly, and the only person they had to talk to about it, if they didn't have a therapist, was their representative, the clergy.
Right.
I saw people take it on the chin with all of that kind of, you know, upset because people were isolated.
Hmm.
People were at home,
And
especially
those are unsung
elderly.
heroes too, because
Oh my
nobody
gosh.
knows that that was going on. Well,
Yeah. No,
the
it's not really
state.
that spoken about that much.
Yeah.
And many quietly left their profession, or at that level of engagement of their profession after the real, crisis bits were over.
Hmm.
So that's interesting. Like I see it from a lot of angles. Majority, I think it was a real wake-up call to humanity on a lot of levels of the destruction cycle and of what can be generated from from this destruction. And destruction might mean it's just not business as usual. I'm staying home and suddenly I'm getting all of my social life and everything via Zoom.
Well, it was
uh,
almost like a divine hand went,
yep.
okay, old
No, not almost.
system, you're done.
Not
New
almost.
system, here it comes.
Not
And
almost. Is definite. And also
I know.
people generally were quieter in the West, especially, where otherwise people would be out in the bars and, having their big social everything. Yet that wasn't happening. So that was really interesting to me. Personally, I had the thought, oh my gosh, because I was teaching in my home and doing my events and everything. And I thought, well, everything's going to go online. And at that time, I thought that might tank my whole, occupation. Fine. Okay, if it does, it does. I'll find something to do. No, it went completely the opposite. What I didn't understand until it really happened was everyone was online looking for content because
Right.
everybody's at home.
Yeah.
I had been on Zoom since 2016. I was a pretty early adopter because I have students all over the world who want to hear the teachings and stuff.
Hmm.
And I was so frustrated and tired of having to explain to everybody how you use Zoom. Yeah, well, once the pandemic hit, you never had to explain that again. Even everybody's grandmother suddenly knew how to use Zoom.
Right.
So there were benefits, and a hyper-connectedness actually emerged out of it that I don't think anyone could have predicted. Certainly in my world, suddenly students from all over the world were coming together and comparing notes on the whole experience of it.
Right.
And that's created friendships now that have been going since, 2020. So it was unexpected in many ways, and I think in some really profound ways. My experience is Mother herself said, everybody sit down, shut up, and deal with yourselves in a way that is unusual, especially for Western
Ooh,
society people.
sit down, shut up,
Hmm.
and deal with something unusual
In yourself.
in yourself. What?
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a clarion cry for a wake up, isn't it?
Hmm. Now, why don't we do that? Why do we, right? I know
Because the
that's the
eternal
question of all
distraction.
questions.
Everything
Why?
is distracting because everything is so engaging, especially to the mind. And the mind's job on that level of its egoic structure is pull you away from yourself,
Hmm.
immerse in the squirrel, in the shiny, in the distraction.
Could it also, let's look at it from a higher self, right? In order to be able to be more discerning, this is one of the things that Sri Aurobindo offered,
Mm.
right? You step in the middle of chaos in order to find your center.
Ken? Most people don't find that easy. I find that easy, but then I grew up in the middle of chaos, so I had of necessity to find something like the eye of the hurricane. While the hurricane
Mhm.
winds are whipping around, fine, but
I
inside
love stuff
it's
that I can step into and help create order in.
oh yes, well that's been your kind of life path, hasn't it? In corporate and
Mhm.
all. Brilliant, so brilliant, right? Yeah.
And you don't know it, right? I never even thought about these things. It all just came natural, and I did these things. And, it's like, and you don't think about that because it's just who you are
Yeah.
until somebody says, oh, because usually you're like that for me. I am a disruptor.
Mm-hmm.
I offer good observations and insights. And even in my first corporate job, um, I was in charge of $7 million in shipments a month, 800 part numbers for an aerospace company for commercial spares. 35 people in a department.
Mm-hmm.
I was the youngest one there. In 6 months, I was at the top of the production list with on-time deliveries and at or above goal.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even think anything about it. I just was doing my thing. I was totally oblivious to everybody else until a couple of supervisors came up to my cubicle, and I'm going, "Oh shit, what did I do?" Right? And then they see my eyes, and they're like, "No, no, it's cool. We want to know what you're doing because you're at the top of the list." And I'm like, "What?" Right? I could not believe
Hilarious.
that. And I said, "Well, the only thing I can attribute it to is my Midwestern values and doing things for others that I would like done for myself." So, right, what's the well, and being in the aerospace military, very militaristic in that
Mhm.
fashion, it was a command and control. Don't give
Mhm.
me what I need. I'm going to beat you up somehow.
Yeah, right. Fear inducing. Yeah, that never works.
No, what short term it does.
Only.
However, yeah, only short term.
You can't run a culture on that
No, no, because it gets vindictive.
fast.
Yeah.
And people are in fear, and we don't produce well when we're afraid.
So by disrupting that, I brought
Yeah.
them in a departmental meeting suggesting that, maybe we might want to think we've gone through the expediter realm. We know how to get around the system that we've worked in. Now we're in a different environment where we're dealing with degreed people who expect a different kind of behavior. We
Mm.
need to give that to them.
Ha! There you go.
I got shunned by
Oh, I bet.
everyone.
I bet.
And eventually, left the company. But those kinds of things, and that was in 1986. 86 that that began
Mm,
happening, and by 89 I was gone.
mm.
By 91 they instituted interpersonal skills classes plant wide, and I am
Duh, they had to, of course.
right.
So the seed was planted.
Yeah,
And how funny that you essentially were saying, I think we need to apply the golden rule here in the corporate environment, which of course nobody wants to hear.
right,
It's really comical, isn't it?
isn't it?
Until they can hear it because things progress and then they finally catch up to the visionary point of view.
Look at how
It's
servant
so
leadership now has become the thing,
good
right?
God,
That's
seriously?
exactly what it is.
It's so funny, isn't it? It's all
I love
right.
it.
It's the
Now,
way the time cycles
how do
go.
you see this
Hmm.
evolving in this is just an odd question came up. What's your vision of the next few years? What do you see potentially happening? Um,
Hmm.
the escalation of a continuing escalation of intelligence, both artificial and human, and how that is going to shape our ability to learn how to work together better.
You know, I keep thinking about Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the TM guru, who had a
Mhm.
brilliant phrase, which was when the intelligence, capital I, intelligence, becomes intelligent.
Mm.
And you can see that's where humanity is going. You know, as more, what I see in all the disciplines and all the different spiritual traditions is that the consciousness is on the rise. That's part of what I wanted to talk about with respect to Mother Divine, the
Mm.
divine feminine, that her nature in this planet is very tricky. You know, she's everything in the creation, meaning like nature is very beautiful. There's beautiful waterfalls and, you know, canyons and beaches and sunsets and this and that. And there's also tsunamis and earthquakes and wildfires and, you know, total wipeouts. And
Mhm.
all of that is her. All of it. The totality of all the positive, all the negative is this nature of the mother in our creation, this big smoke and mirrors show that we think is all so real and compelling. And part of the people will often say to me, don't you think it's really more negative now than it's ever been in our humanity's history? I mean, there's a lot of crap going on the planet that's just hideous,
Oh, we
hideous,
just know about it.
hideous. We just know about it, but also there is enough consciousness now that we look at it and go, that is unacceptable, has to change. Whereas
Absolutely.
I would say 100 years ago, people saw it and went, that's how it is. You know, or took the other side of it, the side of violence and power over and
Right,
retribution.
like the Wild West all over again.
Yes. So I feel that the more we see the negativity for what it is, we see these conflicts as being horrific. We see the devastation of human life and the planet and all these different things as unacceptable.
Right. And it's not
It's
just
a
thinking about
it,
it, it's the feeling of
mm,
it.
it's a symptom that the consciousness has come up high, like to a higher watermark, if you will,
Mhm.
worldwide, where more people are seeing more clearly and saying no, unacceptable. So I think we're only going to continue that kind of a trend. And I
Yeah.
think in tandem with the high divine awareness coming up, you're always going to have high negativity right alongside for the ride. So it might be pretty bumpy in terms of the apparent
What's the initial
polarity.
part of the product curve, right?
Yes,
We're on that
isn't it?
incline where, it's like, nah, 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 nah. And then all of a sudden it's going to be best thing since sliced bread.
It could be. You know, I just feel that I look at negativity as a symptom of how much positivity is rising.
Hmm.
And the death throes, you know, of the kind of old ways of doing. Let's say the patriarchy where we began talking, or let's say the hierarchical structures, whether it's from corporations or religious structures or whatever. A lot of that's getting upended from the bottom up. And when you have that happen, there's a lot of flexing of the old toxic way of doing things. It's natural. It's okay. In the long run, it won't stand. In the short run, yeah, people suffer at the hands of it. It's true.
It's like you mentioned the divine feminine. Let's look at it even from a feminine cyclical
Hmm.
process, right? The earth has menstrual cycles.
Yeah, yes, she does.
right? It's shedding, it's rebirthing,
Mhm.
it gets pregnant and births a bunch of us in the process. And then we,
Yes.
you know, give mother hell because we don't understand her and we think we know everything.
Yeah, and then she has to come and slappity slap 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 to wake her kids up. Every mother wants to raise functional children, not 30-year-olds playing video games in the basement at home.
Right.
And to make functional children, you have to throw a lot of, let's say, testing at them.
And not that
Slap,
I
slap,
like that
slappity slap.
video games in the basement kind of thing, but I had a conversation with gentlemen, both of us had 17-year-olds at the time that were in that habit. And so rather than persuade them not or even do anything to guide them away from it, we just, both of us just sat and watched.
Mhm.
And it's amazing what these kids are learning, especially if they're playing the multi-character, multi-role.
Oh, it's incredible.
They
I,
organize, they
oh,
lead each other, they
yes.
take turns figuring shit out and pardon, but
It creates
it's
a
just
lot of uh, parallel processing in the brain that you don't get any other way. You're talking to a hardened gamer, by the by, and
ah
I did work in the computer gaming industry in the 90s, so I have a great spot for gaming in general and computer games in particular. The distinction I was making was you don't want, a 30-year-old kid who's just living at home doing nothing but, right? You
absolutely
want a full
that kind
adult.
of right.
Teenagers playing games, man, all for it because there's so many problem solving, especially is one of the things that they found psychologically that happens with gamers that doesn't happen with a population who are not gamers. Incredible problem solving abilities.
Right.
Then
And
you
that's
add
the
to
other
it
national
networked
deficit.
games. Do what?
Oh, I was going to say that's the other national debt, critical thinking. That's the other national deficit.
Well, yes, power structures have no interest in people who have these faculties.
Right. And
So,
now, the reason I'm asking you, what do you
mm,
see happening with this combination of consciousness and where it might be going? I kind of we went off on some tangents. Where do you see that over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think the consciousness is on the rise, and I think the divine intelligence, capital I, is expressing itself through more and more and more people. Also, next 3 years means Gen Z and whatever is coming behind them is coming of age. And I feel like the kids who are coming in now are super high souls with a lot of capability that
Mhm.
their forebears did not have, and a lot of open
Well, the
consciousness, open
cognitive
hearts.
capacity and just
Extraordinary.
their quick thinking is
It's
phenomenal
extraordinary.
on
And
some.
creative thinking and
Yes.
out of the box because the boxes aren't fitting anymore. So I think the general, wave of humanity is going in a really good direction. I don't think that means that we won't have conflict problems,
No,
devastation, difficulties, and all like that.
there's a gentleman that, and you're probably familiar with him, Jose Arguelles. He wrote the Mayan Factor. He was on
Oh,
he
gosh,
brought the
yeah.
Mayan calendar out to the rest of the world, basically.
Mm,
Jose was a personal friend. I'd met him and
mm,
got to know each other.
fantastic.
Wonderful human being. And in our discussions, he basically says this, that we're in a 50-year window that opened in 87, the harmonic convergence, closes in 2037. The apex is the solstice, winter solstice of 2012. And that's where the consciousness, the insight, the investigation, was like
Mm,
followed the information curve. It just went almost vertical.
mm,
And then it hit the apex, which is, okay, now that's present.
mhm,
Now what happens? Well, you're carrying it with you. What
mhm.
might happen? Everything around you starts to vibrate differently, and that doesn't fit raises to the surface for
True that.
reformation,
Exactly.
including the events that are happening around the world, eventually coming to the top and being dealt with
Has to be.
in more of a conscious fashion.
Has to be. Whatever, like you can just take an individual, a human being who follows exactly the trajectory that you just laid out, which is things start to surface, the dark side or the challenging, things that are stuck in our emotional or physical or
Mhm.
spiritual selves have to get surfaced, right? They have to come up. They
Right.
have to come out. Purification is a very real
Yeah.
thing. Okay. It happens in individuals as they're waking up. Of course, it also happens in the macrocosm of, let's say, a community or a nation
Mhm.
or even a family. Same exact dynamic. We see it over and over again. Right now, we see, would-be fascist despots on the loose on our planet. How long do you think that's going to stand?
Right. Well,
Mm-mm.
it's all,
No.
we're still processing that. Most of us, as you mentioned before, we have to go through some kind of trauma.
Yep.
What
Correct.
happens when we're done with that?
Yeah.
What do you feel or see or imagine what might happen if we harvested our past, left the trauma behind, and looked to the future with new eyes? What do you think might
Well,
happen then?
I think a kind of renaissance of the consciousness. And for me personally, I see it in motion. I see it from so many angles. I'll tell you a story, which I think is kind of instructive on this front. So, in 2011, I mentioned that my master Kalashwar was an expert on Mother Divine,
Hmm.
and he had said to us over many years, his students, "Hey guys, in exchange for what I'm giving you, which is kind of like the keys to understand this creation, um, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to build a large, like a 9-foot statue of Mother in a certain position on my ashram here in South India." And we all said, sure, sure, yeah, we'll do that, no problem. Eventually, by 2011, he did it himself. He kind of used all of our collective, I think, goodwill and put this 9-foot statue of the mother in a not fierce aspect, like a
Hmm.
Kali, but not like a big smiley face, all the arms and all the weapons, but after she's destroyed the worst negativity, the worst demonic force.
Hmm.
Okay. He puts this 9-foot statue in place. And then within a few months, he took his own samadhi. He left his body. Okay. Then I think it was 2017. I took a group of my students there in the fall around a festival called Navaratri. Navaratri is the 9 days of Mother Divine. It happens every autumn with the lunar calendar. And it's a big time of the mother in all of her different aspects. And so we were there for that. And part of what was decided to happen was, and she's a massive, she's 9 feet tall. So you can imagine like her feet are huge. And you
Hmm.
look up at her and you're like, oh my God. And she's totally there. It's not a statue. She's there. Like that statue has wept. It's emitted fluids. It's not a statue. Anyhow, we decided collectively that we were going to do a 24-hour beautiful process where everyone who was present, there were about maybe 50 people, I think, were going to be in total silence for 24 hours
Hmm.
and be in the room with her in shifts, washing her feet, pouring water over her feet, chanting a mantra that correlates to the water element. I was thinking, wow, this is cool. So we took shifts. We take our groups in and be in there for 2 hours, chanting the mantra and pouring water on her feet. Using the water like that, it washes out a lot of our own personal negativity, but it's also, water is where we generate. I mean, you think about all the life forms on this planet came out of the oceans, right? A child spends its first 9 months developing in water, basically inside the mother, right? The
Or a
water is
bag
where
of
we,
water.
exactly, haha. Generating is the aspect of this water element. And I was thinking, because I had seen over many years, whatever happens in that place called Penukonda, which is where the ashram of Kalashwar is located, it's very strong with the Divine Mother energy there, has been for 18,000 years. I was like, things that happen there tend to influence the planet very quickly. And I'm in there with her, and we're chanting the mantra and we're pouring the water, and I'm thinking, all right, Mother, what are you generating right now? What is it that this is going to bring out planet wide? I'm so interested. It's an open question. I have no answer. I'm just observing
Curious.
the mechanics of what we're doing. Okay, so that happened. It was beautiful. It was very, very high energy. It was very divine. We come back to the US, and within 3 weeks, the Me Too movement started. And
Hmm.
for the first time, we had Hollywood actresses first calling out sexual abuse and sexual assault and an untenable structure in that industry that suddenly sparked planet-wide Me Too coming in every organization, structure, family systems, corporate occupations, women marching everywhere on the planet, and men saying, nope, sorry, unacceptable, sexual assault, rape, molestation, all this stuff has to stop. This is unbelievably wrong. And I was sitting there like, oh my God, Ma, really? Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Right. Because you make the connection. You
Wow.
know that instinctually you had a part in that because of the collective energy that you
Thousand
all
percent.
focused that wasn't specific,
Yeah.
yet it was intentional.
But she knew. And our little peanut pouring the water was kind of like helping to bring out
Hmm.
her decision. What I took from that, because I really looked at it from a lot of angles, was that the consciousness worldwide has come up to a certain point where we can begin, it was a beginning, it's by no means an end to it, but begin to reverse a trend that had been running on this planet for our recorded history, where the men were in charge and could kind of do whatever they wanted, and the women just kind of rolled over for it and shut up about it because of stigma and shame and all the rest. And
Hmm.
suddenly, all of that, like the mother herself, through all of the women, was saying, okay, and it's enough now, guys. It's
Right.
enough. It's enough. So when I look at how is the divine feminine emerging in our world, and when I see what are the trends moving for the next few years, I see more of that. I see more clarity, more dignity, and a general upswing in the consciousness that keeps bringing the enough is enough of the old ways and keeps putting the feet in the fire, of the class who would prefer to go unacknowledged and just keep running everything.
Right.
I,
Right.
I
Well, and
think
they
at the
too
end
are
of the,
designed to dissipate and fade away as the new comes in. Now, we
destroying and then generating again, of course, it
have,
has to be.
right. Now,
And I think a real difference now, right now, what I see, and I'm sure it's going to continue, especially with these generations of young people coming, is that there are way more of us than there are of the elites. And when people recognize that and band together and unify to create some kind of change, and maybe it comes out of a pain and a trauma, or maybe it comes out of a kind of rage, that kind of divine rage that says, yeah, we've had enough now. Whatever it is that motivates it, people start to band together and push the old ways out
right,
and
even the
establish a
insight of,
kind of new way.
I wonder if this could be possible because I look at things from a very creative
Yeah,
standpoint
yeah.
with no attachment to the
Outcome.
history, with
Ah.
no, with no attachment to the history. Well, I'm not pulling the baggage for. We don't need to, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't need
Mm-hmm.
no carry-ons
Mm-hmm.
on this flight. It's the harvesting internally of what we learned and the understanding of how these processes work. And they're all processes that have an outcome of some sort that brings us to a new place where we feel, if not more fulfilled, at least more connected.
Has to be. And funny, you mentioned fulfillment and connectedness in the same sentence. I feel like they're part and parcel of each other.
I do too.
So
It's evidence
that's
that you are, is when you have
that's an
that feeling.
inevitability, isn't it? I mean, don't you think?
I do. Now,
More
it's how we
connectedness.
get there. And one of the things um, that I'm particularly doing, you see the Earth in the background.
Yeah.
So, this is kind of an off-planet view, but yet planetary citizens with the logo I'm showing now, we're putting it together at planetarycitizens.net that we're looking at how do we do the social enterprise kind of thing that brings all of these people. I'm specifically using the co-creation wheel that came out
Mhm.
of Spiral Dynamics and Barbara
Mhm.
Marx Hubbard and Humanities Team, and looking at each sector, who's leading in those, because there's a lot of voices out there that are leading the way, but are still silos because nobody's paying attention to them and they don't
Mhm.
know how to network yet. And so,
Right. How do they all come together and form some sort of common
well,
bond
this
and
is
then move
exactly what
together?
my purpose is with Planetary Citizens. So I'm
Yeah.
going to dissect and distill those, do interviews with, show that there's opportunities present here. I don't know what's going to happen. I just know that connecting the dots, something will, and it's got its own energy. That's all my
Yes.
facilitation services are for, is to bring those people together because they've got the the mindset, the will, the skill set, the technology, and the understanding of how to apply it. Most of them probably already have their concepts written down intact. They're just waiting for that tap on the shoulder to step up and not just be accepted, to be welcomed.
Mm. Isn't that beautiful? That's a great vision.
That's what I was told would happen in my lifetime, and I gave
Mm.
my life to find that out.
Awesome.
So
Yeah.
it's really cool, and yet it's like this huge unknown that is really easy to get lost in the I don't know.
That's reasonable.
And yet there's that surety of doesn't matter. It will manage itself simply by stepping into it.
That's usually the deal.
Yeah,
There are very few people, very few visionaries who really see exactly how one gets to the thing that they see as the goal. The goal is clear. The hows and the steps, who knows?
right. I've been
But that's a
fortunate.
discovery process, isn't it?
Absolutely. And once you've discovered, because of the different realms I've been, all the different types of opportunities I've been given, learning how the processes work within each one of them, eventually becoming a transformational coach, now I can share those insights, understanding, tasty tidbits of wisdom here and there with clients so that they can connect with their own paths and learn how to ask those questions. Because initially, the
Mm,
right questions aren't being asked. And so I help
yes.
facilitate that. And once that pattern changes, then the
Mm,
rest of it just kind of flows. And
isn't
it's
that
just
brilliant?
amazing to behold. It
Well,
really
it's
is.
like an extension of what you did in aerospace, right? Which is
Absolutely.
you were zeroed in on the thing that would help, and yet it wasn't the right time. And I think this is something else that I see in this intelligence becoming intelligent, that enough smart people now are realizing they don't have all the answers. And so maybe they don't know the right questions yet,
Mhm.
but at least they're starting to ask questions.
Absolutely.
And
And
that's
that fuels
important.
it. That creates the magnetism to bring those books, tapes, people,
Resources, however
right, the
this.
resources that into their life path.
Yes, that's
It's
it.
up to them to recognize when they show up.
That's another art form.
So how would you, I know we're kind of, we've gone way over time.
I
It's
know.
been wonderful. This is fine. I love long form. Not everybody does. And yet it's so important to have these kinds of discussions.
Yeah, I think so.
And for those of you who stuck with us, Alx, what could you offer as a synopsis, truncated offering for how people can move closer to themselves in finding a new normal for them at this point?
That's a good question. How do we move closer to ourselves? I think we've been touching on it in a lot of different themes.
Mhm.
The willingness to acknowledge that maybe we don't have all the answers is a big deal, and the willingness to ask questions. I think one of the biggest questions is, who am I really? Why am I alive on this planet at this time? What is my purpose? Who am I? Not my name, occupation, age, history, like that, but essentially at the soul level, what am I? Who am I? And when when we start that inquiry for real, my preferred way to do it is in meditation, but we're sitting in nature somewhere really quietly and really asking heartfully internally, who am I really?
Mhm.
What am I doing here?
I love how
Nature
Rilke presents it.
nature herself has to respond.
Yeah, it
It has to
does.
start giving some kind of you know, reflection about that, some kinds of clues or some kind of direct mm, information about that. And
Experience.
this we have to, well, it can be experienced. This we have to listen
Yeah.
carefully internally for. But I think that's a big part of it. My master in India, Swami Kalashwar, he was interviewed a lot, and people would say, well, what is spirituality really to you? And he would say it's about people knowing about themselves.
Hmm.
Whoa, that's a gauntlet.
And yet it's available.
And it's internal. We all have the same apparatus. We all came as human beings on this planet. We
And you
all have the
ask the
same,
questions.
we all have the same, ultimately we all have the same consciousness. So why aren't we accessing that? What is getting in the way of that? What are the millions of distractions? What are the, slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that we have to negotiate through with emotional blocks and baggages and all that stuff? Okay, we
Or
all have
do
history.
we?
Well, we have to acknowledge that happened and then move on. But how we get through whatever our configuration of emotional blocks is,
Hmm.
it's well worth it. Those are all distractions that keep us from seeing what we are truly. And if we really want to know what we are, we have to find some way to dissolve those distractions internally to get to the real truth, the real essence of what we're doing here and who each of us, like everybody came with a mission. Everybody came with a real purpose. That's a popular word, right? In the vernacular now, your purpose. But it's true. Everybody has a purpose, a soul purpose. We need to find that. We need to research internally and find out what are we really, you know.
Don't put it in a rank, file, category, hierarchy, anything like that, because none of that matters.
What a
Your
kind.
specific place is your specific place, and it fits with everybody else.
Correct. And like in the same way that no two snowflakes are identical, they won't be, they never will be.
Hmm.
Infinite variation. Yet they're all snowflakes. You pile them up, you get a big pile.
And it provides a beautiful snowscape.
Can. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why not? But each of us has we're we have to research in ourselves. Who are we? That's my biggest feeling, and that's hard. Let's say somebody's facing a really, catastrophic illness or something. They really owe it to themselves to do that research. That's part of the healing process.
Hmm.
Who am I? Why am I experiencing this right now? What is the whole trajectory of my soul? How have I come to this place in this lifetime now, going through this experience that I'm having? What is all this? It's so important. I honestly, from this vantage point, okay, so I'm 50, almost 58 now. I can't imagine a life unexamined like that.
Very true.
I can't,
Very true.
but I
And
know a lot of people, this is kind of like we're speaking gibberish here. It sounds like a foreign language almost right now. And yet I really
perhaps
encourage everybody, like, take some time. Take some time, sit quietly and ask, who am
in speaking of time,
I? Yes.
we must come to a close. I
I'm so
so
sorry.
appreciate the time we have shared, the exploration,
It's
the
beautiful.
stories. It's just been wonderful, Alex, and I do appreciate that. I know our guests will when they spend the time with it, and it'll
It's a
be,
blast.
yeah, it really was. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, what a lovely exchange, and um, yeah, this is the start of a beautiful friendship.
Wonderful. And so, namaste and
Namaste.
lak'ech. And thank you all for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. And thank you again, Alex. And I'm Zen Benefiel, your host. I will see you again soon.